Okay, this morning I'm going to continue the talks of the 5 ranks of Tozan, the Kokun, which are the ascending 5 ranks. And the last time I talked about submission. So the first of these ranks is called shift, a shift in our perspective, and then submission, or kind of a letting go. And today we talk about awakening. And sometimes it's called achievement, but I don't quite like that translation because it sounds like we're achieving something like a victory in a sports contest. But I'll just read the verse and then we'll get to it later. That Master Tozan wrote for awakening. He said, the flower of a withered tree heralds an eternal spring. Hunting a unicorn, a man rode backwards on a jade elephant. Now he hides himself higher beyond 1,000 peaks, blessed with bright moonshine and pure breezes. So like I said, the title is sometimes translated as achievement, and but not in a self-congratulatory sense. It's a more like merit or good results. And I use awakening. It doesn't have a sense of gaining or losing. It just emphasizes seeing clearly. In the Book of Equanimity, the collection of koans in case 67, it says, attention. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, Shakyamuni Buddha says, now I see all sentient beings everywhere, they're endowed with the Tathagata's wisdom and virtue, but because of deluded thoughts and attachments, they don't realize it. So he's saying everybody is perfect just as they are, but we don't realize it because of deluded thoughts and attachments. And my teacher and his teacher, Yasutani Roshi, always said that there's 2 aspects to our practice. One is intrinsic and the other is experiential. So intrinsically, like the Buddha said, we're all perfect as we are, but if we don't experience it, then it's just a bunch of words. So intrinsically, you see through the eyes of the Buddha. You hear with the ears of the Buddha, and you sit in the seat of the Buddha. And when you're sad, heaven and earth are sad. And when you shake with laughter, the earth spins on its axis. And I tell you that this is a Buddhist truth. Yet, if you don't experience it, you're like a ghost trying to satisfy your hunger with a picture of a rice cake. Intrinsically, we are all the same as the Buddha. Yet most of us do not experience ourselves as such. We hear that if we sit like the Buddha, we are the Buddha. Even with all of this encouragement, we drift over swamps like a wispy spirit. We imagine that we are the Buddhas, yet we have no idea what the Buddha's like. It's like one who lives in the mountains and hears about the salt water of the ocean, but has no idea what salt water tastes like. After a long and arduous journey, that person arrives to the seashore and sticks her fingers into the water and finally tastes the salt of all the minerals that are dissolved in the water. Now she knows what it is. when we're able to release some of our deluded thoughts and attachments, we can directly experience the world through the eyes of the Buddha, the awakened one. The intrinsic state and the experiential state merge, and there's no difference between them. But to just hear about the intrinsic state without direct experience of it leads to all kinds of misunderstandings. There's a tendency by some Zen students to say, since everything is perfect and complete as it is, and since I have the wisdom and virtue of the Buddha, it doesn't matter what I do. I can do anything I want and still be in accord with the Buddha. This is false understanding. It's called Buji Zen. It's so common, it even has a category. Buji Zen means doesn't matter Zen, which can be quite dangerous. It can lead to abuse of one's position in a Zen community and the propagation of false teachings. The direct experience of the Buddha's teachings is essential for one to assume a position of authority in our lineage. This is what this rank is about. When you awaken, the intrinsic and the experiential are the same. So regarding this rank, a monk asked Tozan, what is awakening? What is achievement? And Tozan said, when throwing down a mattock, what is it? A mattock is a tool for digging in the earth. So we could say, in other words, that when you stop all of your delusive thoughts, attachments, inadequate activities, and reside in non-doing, what is it? Then you know you're endowed with the wisdom and virtue of the Buddha. In case 15 in the Book of Equanimity, Isan asked Kyozan, where do you come from? And Kyozan replied, I come from the fields. And Isan asked, how many were in the fields? And Kyozan was carrying a mattock, and he stuck it in the ground, and he stood with his arms folded on his chest. And Isan said, in the southern mountains, there are lots of people who reap thatch. And Kyozan pulled up this mattock and left. So a Zen master commenting on this case said, very few understand the point of Isan's question. When Kyozan answered him by planting the hoe, Buddhas and patriarchs disappeared. So Isan asked, how many were in the fields? What's he really asking? Is this a Zen question or an ordinary question? Kyozan plants his mattock in the ground and crosses his arms. And at that moment, all Buddhas and patriarchs disappeared. So how many were there? Just this moment, nothing else. No? Reminds me of something that the Buddha also said when he was enlightened. He said, I and all beings everywhere are simultaneously enlightened. In other words, Kyozan is saying to Isan when he plants his mattock that all beings are simultaneously just me at this moment. How many are there? Just this, nothing else. But then Isan pushes him further. He says, well, maybe it is just this, but in the southern mountains, lots of people are reaping thatch. How about all the people other than just this? So commenting on that, another Zen master wrote, meeting on a narrow road, escape is impossible. Having come across the bridge, he walks upon the shore, for the first time realizing that the whole body is muddy and wet. So Kyozan says it's just this, just me. How many are there? There's just me in the whole world. And Isan says, well, what about all the other people? And Kyozan picks up his hoe, his mattock, and leaves. Who are the other people? Say, what other people? See, but meeting on a narrow road, escape is impossible. So what's a narrow road? That's when we practice and penetrate into our concentration. We see that there's no self and no other. Then crossing the bridge, the whole body is muddy and wet. Someone asked me about our vows. We chant, sentient beings are numberless, I vow to save them. And I was asked, I said, well, that person is a bodhisattva who someone doesn't liberate him or herself until everyone else is liberated. How can that be? How can you liberate others if you're not liberated yourself? See, but crossing over the bridge, you realize that your whole body is muddy and wet. So we have a phrase in Zen that says, deluded within delusion. So if there's no self and no other, who are we saving? How does a body get wet and muddy? So there's two sides we have to understand here. And the koan is presenting both of them to us. So delusion within delusion. So if there's no one to save, how are we going to save them? You're deluded that there's someone to save and deluded that you're going to save them. That's considered to be one of the highest states in Zen, delusion within delusion. And that's what Isan is getting at here. So according to the sutras, when the Buddha was born, he stuck, excuse me, he was born fully formed, and he took 3 steps and he pointed one finger to heavens and one finger to the earth, and he said, above heavens and earth, I alone am the world honored one. That's what Kyozan is saying in response to the question, how many there are in the fields. I alone am the world honored one. What about all the people reaping thatch? What about all those people who are suffering? What about all those people who are getting old and losing their abilities and faculties? What about all the people who are going to work every day? That's how you get your body muddy and wet, saving all sentient beings, crossing over that bridge. So coming back to Tozan, the monk said, what is awakening? And Tozan said, when throwing down a mattock, what is it? Is Tozan referring to Kyozan sticking his mattock in the ground? In that case, all Buddhas and ancestors and oneself disappear. There is only just this. There is Tozan saying, when you throw away all your attachments, what is it? And ultimately, both of these interpretations are not different. This stage of awakening is equivalent to the stage in the 10 ox herding pictures of catching the ox. And there's a verse in the 10 ox herding pictures. It goes like this. After the greatest efforts, the herdsman has caught the ox. The will is yet too obstinate and the impetus too strong to break his wildness easily. At times, the fox gets away, the ox gets away and climbs distant plateaus. Then again, he runs far off into deep places filled with fog and clouds and wants to hide. So with great effort, you catch the ox, but it's not easily tamed. And what this means is that your habit-ridden consciousness still controls your actions in the world. See, so even though you might see the ox and capture it, we still have all these habits. They don't just suddenly disappear. You have to continue to practice and further clarify this great matter. So let's look at Tozan first. He says, the flowering of a withered tree heralds an eternal spring. So the withered tree is when you forget the self. Then after you let go or release your small self, your life flowers and heralds wholesomeness, which has always been and which will always be. So the flowering of a withered tree heralds an eternal spring. So to forget the self is to be enlightened by all things, and that's the eternal spring. So if you forget the self, everything is the enlightened way, no matter what you encounter in your life. Because what causes difficulties is because of our attachment to the notion of a self and how that self is impacted by all the things in our life. But without a self, we can move freely through all kinds of situations. The withered tree symbolizes maturity in the practice, where all the leaves have fallen. Then there's another aspect of a withered tree. The sun can shine through and illuminate everything beneath it. So the second line is intriguing, that hunting a unicorn, a man rode backward on a jade elephant. What? What is that about? Well, the unicorn could be your true nature, or it could also be conditioned by the phenomenal world. But what is a unicorn? It's a chimera, right? It's a fabrication of the mind. It could represent anything that's illusory. But riding backward, that means you're not conforming to, all of the constraints of your life. We think a fool is the one who rides backwards on a horse, for example. So riding backward, that's an act of freedom. And have you ever seen a jade elephant that you can ride? That's also an act of freedom. In the Jeweled Mirror Samadhi, there's a line that we chant it sometimes here in the morning, and I mentioned it actually a couple of weeks ago, or I don't know, maybe a month ago. There's a line that said, the wooden man starts to sing, the stone woman gets up dancing. It is not attained in thoughts or feelings, so how to reflect on it? How do we reflect on riding backward on a jade elephant? Wow. Can you imagine that? Isn't there the sense of expansiveness and freedom, and even reflecting on it? So how free is that? I mean, it's even better than the gingerbread man. Yeah. So he's talking about real freedom here. But now he hides himself higher beyond 1,000 peaks. That's the next line of Tozan. Now he hides himself higher beyond 1,000 peaks. So how do you hide yourself higher beyond 1,000 peaks? So there's no Buddha above and no beings below. There's no self to grab onto. So since there's only one body, where is the small ego grasping self? And he's blessed with bright moonshine and pure breezes. So as I mentioned, the enlightened life is to be blessed no matter what occurs. It includes joy and pain. So every day is a good day, even when we're having difficulties. Another case in the Book of Equanimity, case 9, it's kind of long, but it says when Kyuho was at Master Sekito's monastery, he became Sekito's attendant. And when Sekito passed away, the assembly wanted to appoint the head monk of the meditation hall as chief priest. And Kyuho did not approve and so said, "Wait until I question him. If he understands our late master's intent, I will serve him as I did our late master." Then he asked the head monk, "Our late master said, go through, desist, cease. One thought is 10,000 years, cold ash and withered trees, and one strip of pure white silk. Tell me, what state of affairs does this clarify?" And the head monk said, "It clarifies the affair of a one-colored state." And Kyuho said, "If that is so, you do not quite understand our late master's intent." And the head monk said, "Don't you approve me? Prepare and bring incense to me." Kyuho did so, and then burning the incense, the head monk declared, "If I did not understand our late master's intent, I would not be able to expire while the incense is still burning." So saying, he sat down and died. And Kyuho patted him on the back, saying, "It's not that you can't expire while sitting or pass away while standing. It's just that you haven't seen our late master's intent, even in your dreams." So the head monk was stuck in this stage of awakening. You might be able to enter deep samadhi and even develop special psychic abilities, but that's not sufficient. How are you going to function in the world? The functioning of wisdom is compassion. You still hang on to your habit-ridden consciousness of having to be superior to others, of thinking that you know more than others, of thinking that you know what's best, then you might as well expire while sitting and pass away while standing. You still won't know the late master's intent, even in a dream. Here's what Isan has to say about this. If a person is truly enlightened and has realized the fundamental and is aware of it himself, in such a case, he is actually no longer tied to the poles of cultivation and non-cultivation. In other words, he doesn't have to worry about sudden or gradual cultivation. However, ordinarily, even though the original mind has been awakened by an intervening cause, so that that person is instantaneously enlightened in his reason and spirit, yet there remains the inertia of habit formed since the beginning of time, and it cannot be fully eliminated at a stroke. He must be taught to completely cut off the streams of habitual ideas and views. Oh, thank you. He must be taught to cut off completely the streams of habitual views and ideas caused by still operative karma. So what they're saying is that even in this awakened state, there's still more practice. In fact, Kokun said that the most difficult practice takes place after awakening, after Satori. So something to look forward to, right? So thus Tozan created the fourth Kokun stage, which is called collective awakening, and we'll take that up next time.